were coming into a void, effectively. There wasn't, you weren't taking over from someone whose shows you were going to have to defend.
But actually, I quite like that.
Yeah.
It means you're not filling someone's shoes. And it was, I think, when I was at the BBC, you're kind of looking over your shoulder at this immense, amazing legacy and all these heroes that you've, I think, God, I'm commissioning this stuff. This is extraordinary. I think at Sky, it just felt, it did feel very free to not have the weight of a legacy and to feel we could start afresh. And everything felt very fresh. Stuart's made it feel like that. All the commissioners there feel it's this amazing time there. It's really interesting.
But how do you start to gather ideas? Presumably you have to set up some kind of manifesto beyond, we want comedy for a broad audience with a twist.
I think I realised that we've been a bit passive in the past, in my previous role, and sort of waited for the idea to come across the desk, and I thought that's going to take too long. We've got to deliver. Stuart kept saying, "Can we have it tomorrow?" we've got to land this stuff quickly. And I think, having worked in the industry for 20 years now, oh my God, I sort of knew who I wanted to work with.
Right.
So I was a little bit more pragmatic and a bit more pushy about what we wanted.
So you went out and actually talked to the talent that you wanted to employ.
And I felt I'd been a bit kind of, let's see what nice things come along, which you can do at the BBC. There's an immense amount to play with. Right. At Sky, it's not just sitting there waiting on your desk. You've got to go out, and I sort of say it's a bit like fly fishing rather than sitting on a trawler, and that's why I think I've enjoyed that bit more of a personal sort of relationship with each of our shows, because it's really creatively rewarding to feel you're at the beginning of each journey.
So I think I'm right in saying that the first thing that actually hit the screens that was your commission was the 2010 season of Little Crackers. Yes. Were Little Crackers your idea?
Yes. Well, I have to all credit to Sophie Turner-Lang, Uber boss, Stuart Murphy boss, Uber boss, who said drama had done these brilliant 10-minute tales from the previous year, and she said, it's comedy's turn, what are you going to do? And I just thought, very simply, massive names, a real treat. I've been obsessed with autobiography. I think write about what you know, but also something intimate. Pre-fame was interesting, a point where Stephen Fry even, there was a time he wasn't famous, and when did you feel you could have some vague connection with someone even as erudite as Stephen Fry? That interests me a lot. So and I like the way it was an anthology. We could work with lots and lots of different producers and suppliers, so it was a bit of a calling card for everyone to know very quickly we're open to business and getting some great producers working on our shows. And
did that actually make it easier to attract big on-screen talent to Sky One?
Definitely, because it was short.
Yeah.
10 minutes, it's only 3 days filming. Yeah. It was a real pleasure for them as well, and they got to direct some themselves. Victoria Wood directed hers, Catherine Tate. So there was another little interesting thing, creative freedom that we could put in the hands of people who are so used to being in the other side of the camera.
Right.
Where actually you get to feel it is a bit frustrating not being a writer or director. So I was able to give them that chance.
Most of the comedies, the sitcoms on Sky One, so Trolleyed, The Cafe, Mount Pleasant, they have a distinct flavour, don't they, from something that you would see, say, on BBC One. Can you encapsulate what they're...
I think reflecting modern Britain felt very important to us. Sky, obviously very well known for its brilliant American acquisitions, but a massive push for us was just to make sure the Sky customer felt that they weren't just turning to Sky One for a window on American culture, but it was about us, and so that was really important. And I think, we just really picked massive precincts that people would get, and I think with the precinct also came a strong sense of place.
Right.
So Trolleyed, supermarket, sort of one of those ideas you think, why hasn't it been done before?
Right.
I think it took for Sky to go, okay, we need to build a life-size supermarket in order for this to actually land on screen and look authentic. That's probably why it hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
So sort of for each show, I suppose for the cafe, Craig Cash was behind the cafe. It was Ralph Little and Michelle Terry. Stuart actually in the meeting said, you know, what's the extra something, what's the extra 30% we could give your show? And Craig said, I want to shoot it on film, and I want to create a set that will be in situ. If you know the cafe, it's set in Weston-super-Mare. And again, never been done before, but a sort of goldfish bowl of a set where the cafe has windows on all sides. So in every single shot, you're aware of all the world going on outside while our characters are sort of...
So that's actually Weston-super-Mare in real time?
Yeah,
right.
Filming right now. So there's something in both being very simple and reflecting normal life, but I think also adding something to it, and maybe castings in there as well. There was one moment when Trolley was playing, and you turned over to Game of Thrones, and Mark Addy was playing the king and the butcher, selling you a sausage at the same time. And you sort of go that ambition with our casting as well, and I hope in an inventive way was really important. I think the other thing was, again, autobiography obsessed, is talking to a writer like Sarah Hooper, who was behind Mount Pleasant, about just almost having the courage to write something about your normal life. And her husband's a plumber, and she'd written on Shameless, and just offering her the chance to show real Manchester life on a big scale.
But it is Manchester, and Trolleyed is Warrington.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more regionality in the settings than you would find on BBC One.
For me, it's really important. If I'm cynical, it's a bit of a shortcut to having strong characters with a very strong identity. I'm not saying it's easier, it's just more identifiable as a piece. I think the other show is Stella, of course, which was Ruth Jones, just desperate to tell a story based on her own world.
Right.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Well, I mean, yes, but it does give a flavour that audiences at home can latch onto as potentially being their world, or being a world like their world. Even if they live in Manchester, their world might be closer to the world in Stella than it is to the world in Outnumbered, or something which is obviously very metropolitan, very London focused.
The other thing is love is at the heart of pretty much all of our shows. Love's at the heart of The Crackers.
Yeah.
And I'm not obsessed with this, and there will be other sorts of comedy, but I just felt we needed it. We needed it in our comedy. I think we've turned the dial a bit. There's still, of course, room for sharp, abrasive, witty, satirical, and we'll be doing some of that to come. But again, to land things well, and just looking at Sky One and feeling it should be, we want it to be a channel that people will turn to and feel better about themselves.
When did you first start thinking, I would like to work in TV comedy for a living?
God, not till a lot later. So I went to Edinburgh University. God, this is so... I went to Edinburgh University, but I didn't do any work there. I worked in the theatre, brilliant student theatre there. Highly recommend that to anybody who wants to vaguely get into theatre, television, film. So that was the training ground. I honestly found myself just constantly drawn to comedies. Just sort of was like a homing pigeon, would always return there. That's where I got the bug, really. And then a friend of mine said there was a job going at the comic strip. So just after university, I got a job at the comic strip.
And tell us about the comic strip, because that was a sort of anarchic, satirical troupe.
So it came out at pretty much the same time as the Young Ones. Again, I have this slight thing, and I'm not anti the Cambridge Footlights journey through, because God, the best writers have come through that journey. But I do feel sometimes you get British comedy, we're in danger of getting a bit stuck with a certain voice, and it's almost honed out of that. And then there's sort of Radio 4 and there's BBC 2, and it's all simply marvellous. And I rather craved something different. Young Ones was obviously part of that. And do you know, on a basic level, it wasn't intimidating. It was very silly. I mean, really stupid at times. And I think I can do this and hang out with this crowd. So it was me, Nara Park, and Robert Popper.
Right.
And we all were in this tiny office in Berwick Street, being shouted at by Peter Richardson. brilliant training
And he was
ground.
the sort of driving
He was
creative
amazing,
force
yeah.
behind the comic strip.
Yeah, and ironically, a lot of the shows that they when I was there weren't quite as big as the ones that had just
Right.
gone. But I was simply a massive fan. So
Yeah.
to work in the comic strip, which you've been watching on TV in your adolescence,
Yeah.
I
'Cause the
mean, I
comic
had
strip-
to practice a look of sort of not looking starstruck, and just thinking this is really normal. Don't look impressed by anything.
Yeah.
And I mastered this look of
It's key skill. The comic strip was on the very first night of Channel 4, I think,
Yes.
where it featured the comic strip.
Yeah.
So they were sort of iconic, brand-defining,
and not BBC,
show.
I think was interesting. as
yeah,
well, yeah.
for Channel 4, which was
Yeah.
obviously set up to create something new and different
Yeah.
and alternative.
Yeah.
And they'd come, I think, from kind of comedy store
Definitely.
roots, from kind of stand-up, and so they were used to being,
Yeah. Manchester
heckled
University, not Oxbridgey, quite a different route through.
yeah. And then their heyday, potentially, in the rest of the 80s.
Yeah, and then I joined.
And then you joined. And it all went a bit downhill.
So I was there in '92, and they were the worst and grateful. It was like the Detectives on the Edge of a Nervous Breakdown, which was the Bill sequel, which was very funny, and some other ones that no one will remember. But I mean, for me, working with Naira Park, who's obviously gone on to launch, establish Big Talk, and just so admire what Naira did at Big Talk, and having a collective where when we were at the comic strip, we sort of absolutely put the writer and the talent first. And I know that sounds sort of obvious, but it is actually quite easy to get it the wrong way round. And she created a place at Big Talk for fantastic names like Graham Linehan, Peter Serafinovitz, and Simon Pegg, and Nick Frost, Edgar Wright, to feel very creatively free and yet very supported by her. She absolutely knew she was the one who would find the money, make sure it came in on budget, and just sort of drove them, but gave them the headspace to come up with fantastic ideas. So Space was the launch of Edgar Wright's amazing career, and obviously Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, gone on to do amazing things. So again, they're my contemporaries, so I'm very proud to have had anything remotely to do with them.
Yeah.
And Nora's just someone I admire immensely.
You joined comedy commissioning at the BBC, I think, in 98, 99.
Yeah.
You'd done a number of jobs in the since you joined comic strip
Yeah.
in 92.
Yeah.
Talk
I
us a
wandered
bit
about.
through your finding yourself
I pretended
years.
to be a wardrobe mistress to get onto a show called An Evening with Gary Lineker, simply because I wanted to hang out with funny people. I really couldn't sew a button on, and I was useless at it. But it was starring Martin Clunes and Paul Merton, Clive Owen, rather amazingly. I know, who would have thought? Caroline Quentin, Andy Harris was producing. I did let him into the secret later on that I didn't know what I was doing. But it was great to sort of, it was a full scale, I think it was a sort of special for Granada at the time. So we did that, and then lots of different things, and which I won't bore anyone with. But the point was, sort of kept going, why am I working in comedy, and feeling you were on a little elastic with needing to come back to what I really love doing. And I love drama as well, but I thought this is more challenging to try and make people laugh. I think it's very difficult, and
Yeah.
I didn't get a huge amount of pleasure out of did documentary, we did drama, I tried other things, but ended up at the BBC.
What documentary did you make?
We made Ruck Wives with Naira, Big Talk, for Channel 4,
Right.
Sharon Osbourne, and the beginnings of
Beginnings of
that
the Osbournes.
celebrity sort of obsession with
Right.
celebrity culture. It was great fun, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
So, and how did you get your job commissioning comedy at the BBC in the late 90s?
My first job there was temping in comedy. So I typed up scripts, and I was really good at typing, and I'd recommend to anybody, just get really good at typing. And then I stayed, and I read, I mean, I did say, oh, by the way, I have worked at the comic strip, but no one really listened. So I just started reading scripts and doing reports, sticking around, and just making sure people kind of got to know that I may not be in this BBC in-house comedy, the scary bit with John Plowman and Geoffrey Perkins, but we had this other bit of the BBC called Independent Commissioning Group, under Jane Root at the time, and it was commissioning from Hattrick and Talkback, and the comic strip. We did. I ended up commissioning Stella Street, which was kind of weird.
So what was the very first show you commissioned at the BBC?
The very first show was. The very first show I exec'd was Baby Cow's output. So the first one was Human Remains, which remains one of my favourite shows of all time.
Right.
And then, I mean, I became a commissioning editor, so it sort of morphed.
Right.
And then you stick around long enough and you end up being controller of commissioning. So, yeah.
Yeah, you just end up being controller of comedy commissioning at the BBC. It just happens.
Stick around. So yeah, I think the Baby Cow stuff was the first stuff I got. I really connected with what they were trying to do.
So that's the Steve Coogan, Henry Normal production company, who are one of the producing companies on one of the shows we're going to see.
Moon Boy.
That we're going to see later on, the Chris O'Dowd show.
Yeah, Steve Coogan's in it as well. Yeah.
And when you were made controller of comedy commissioning at the BBC, so we're now in 2004-5-ish, something like that.
Ish, yeah.
What did you think then? I want to change things here.
That's really interesting. I actually thought, oh my God, they've given me this job that's ridiculous, and it never existed before. So it was sort of, what is this odd job? Because you've also, you've got to work with in-house comedy and figure out how your relationship's going to work, and you've also got a commission from all the independent companies. So in a way, it was just sort of making the job work, let alone having a vision and a strategy. It's a complicated patchwork of brilliant producers all vying for position.
Right.
And it was almost a job sort of keeping everyone in their place and making sure that you hopefully were selecting the right ideas to come through. But it was like a cacophony of ideas and just trying to make sense of what's BBC One, what are we doing at BBC One, what we're doing at BBC Two, and then we launched BBC Three and BBC Four.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was more very big strategy planning job.
Yeah.
I'm not making it sound much fun, but it was a huge.
Was it much fun?
It had its moments. There were some great moments, but I think it was just a very, very big role, and sitting alongside very high-powered channel controllers.
Right, so you've got this double tick
and
system.
And had two babies in the job.
Oh,
so,
of course.
You have those moments you think, God, everything's got to stop, and I've got to pick it up again. So it was a big change in my life going on as well. A lot to contend with.
Let's think about that. You've got 4 channel controllers, obviously, who will change over time, but you had presumably Lorraine Hegacy, Peter Fincham running BBC One, Rowley Keating on 2, Stewart on 3 for launch, and Rowley on 4 for launch, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that's a very diverse group of people that you've got to satisfy in terms of taste.
Yeah.
That you've got to satisfy with your output.
I would watch Jane Tranter very carefully and try and do vaguely what she would be doing, which was to.
So Jane Tranter was at that point your boss.
Jane Tranter was head of drama, and for a while, yes, there was this bit called Fiction that was developed. So she was my boss, and she was really smart at owning the strategy and allowing the controllers in now and again to endorse the strategy, but sort of Peter Fincham would drive him mad because she'd never show him any bloody scripts. She'd just go, "Here's 2 I like, let's do these," and he'd have no bloody choice at all. Right. So there was a bit of that, but I kind of felt Jane Tranter was older and wiser than me, and I felt, you do feel as though you're going with the ebb and flow of tastes of the controllers. You're trying to work those out, then they go and change. You've got to try and build another relationship. You've got all of the comedy producers all sort of you sort of have had a relationship going there that you want to follow through and deliver a show that you promised 2 years ago, because comedy takes a long time. So it's kind of complicated. There are lots of meetings, lots of moments to sort of say, stop the flow. Yeah. And I'm just glad that I don't have to. It was so complicated. Right. It really was. And I hated keeping people waiting. It was really frustrating.
Stewart obviously launched BBC Three, and you provided the comedy for that, a wide range.
I think we honestly did it together. I mean, partnerships are so important. I think we really got it, and we shared a sense of humour.
Because it was really comedy where BBC Three made its name, wasn't it?
Yeah,
in
we
the
had
early.
a real golden era of it.
So we had Gavin and Stacey, we had
Nighty
Nighty
Night.
Night, Little Britain.
Yeah, and I think it was, you know, meet Stuart Murphy. He's got, you know, he's in the audience, so I'm going to make him blush. But he's got an infectious, not an infection. He's got an infectious personality, and talent adore him and want to please him actually. And I think it just was a great moment of feeling, again, creatively free, feeling you can play and misbehave and have some fun and slightly out of the spotlight of BBC One, BBC Two, can muck around. It was just injected fun back into the process, and I think that's why Matt and Dave responded to it. You feel as though you can experiment and take risks.
Yeah.
And it was Baby Cow was a company that absolutely slotted into. Really interestingly, in-house BBC didn't, not for ages, and it was very telling, I think, of where BBC in-house comedy had come from. Its roots were not from that way, and it was the independent companies, through me in commissioning, that grabbed hold of BBC Three and realised it was a place to have a slightly different voice.